The tag said $1.50 for the whole shelf. She read 3 labels and put her hand on the table to steady herself. 40 years extinct. Behind those jars was a dead man's life work, and nobody at that sale knew what they were throwing away for the price of a decent lunch. Clara Voss drives her dented white hatchback down a gravel road in the Willamette Valley foothills, following a hand-lettered estate sales sign stapled to a telephone pole. The brass hand lens on its leather cord swings against her chest as the car hits a rut. Her dark auburn ponytail, pulled low, brushes the headrest. Loose wisps at her temples catch the morning light coming through the windshield. It's Saturday. She's got $162 in her wallet, cash she pulled from her checking account yesterday because the card's been declining at gas stations and she's tired of the look the clerk gives her. 38 acres of her dead grandfather's land sit behind her, 12 miles east. The family wants her to sell. Her aunt in Portland has called 3 times this month. Her cousin sent a realtor's card in the mail with a sticky note that said, "Just talk to him." Clara peeled the note off, stuck it to the inside of her trash can lid, and went back to work. Work for Clara means 2 things. Monday through Thursday, she catalogs seed accessions at the Oregon State Seed Lab. Part-time, no benefits, $11.40 an hour. She sits at a bench with tweezers and a dissecting scope, logging morphological traits into a database that hasn't been updated since 1991. Fridays and weekends, she's on Earl's land, running her own small seed-saving experiments in a greenhouse she built from salvaged storm windows and 2x4s. The experiments don't pay. Nothing pays. The property taxes on 38 acres in the Willamette foothills run $2,340 a year, and the next installment is due in November. She's here for canning jars. That's it. Quart-sized balls or kerns, anything with a good seal ring, because she needs vessels for her rye isolation plots, and new jars cost $1.09 apiece at the hardware store, which adds up when you need 60 of them. The estate sale is in a pale yellow farmhouse outside Junction City. A middle-aged couple, the dead man's niece and her husband, sit in lawn chairs near the garage, a cash box between them on a TV tray. They don't stand up when Clara parks. The husband is reading a Louis L'Amour paperback. The niece scrolls through something on her phone. They've been at this all morning, and they look like they'd rather be anywhere else. Clara walks past a table of ceramic figurines, a rack of old coats, a box of VHS tapes. She finds the shelf against the back wall of the garage. Mason jars, dozens of them, quarts and pints, some with zinc lids, some with the newer 2-piece bands. A cardboard sign taped to the shelf reads, $150, whole lot. She reaches for the nearest jar. The tag said $1.50 for the whole shelf. She read 3 labels and put her hand on the table to steady herself. The first jar she lifts has a strip of masking tape across the glass, and on that tape someone has written in soft pencil, Cascade Amber Flint, 1951. Inside, behind the dusty glass, she can see kernels, orange amber, translucent at the tips, packed tight. Her gray-green eyes go wide. She knows that name. She's seen it exactly once in a USDA plant introduction catalog from 1947, cross-referenced in a loss report from 1958. Declared extinct, no known living accession. Gone. She sets it down carefully. Her fingers are shaking, and she doesn't want to drop it. The second jar, Soap Creek Winter Rye, 1948. A dense pack of gray-blue seeds with long awns pressed against the glass like eyelashes. Also gone. Listed as lost in every database she's ever queried at the lab. She searched for it herself 6 months ago when she was writing up her rye notes. The third, Polk County Blue Pod, 1953. A bush bean, purple-black pods dried to a papery shell, seeds rattling faintly when she tilts the jar. Extinct since 1961, according to the Seed Savers Exchange yearbook. Her mind races. If these are viable, and seeds stored dry in glass can last decades, sometimes longer, she's holding genetic material that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Not in Fort Collins, not in Svalbard, not in any university freezer. 3 varieties the world wrote off as dead, sitting on a folding table in a stranger's garage next to a stack of Reader's Digest magazines. She counts the jars. 43. She doesn't read the rest of the labels. She doesn't want to stand here any longer than she has to. She walks back to the lawn chairs, pulls her wallet out of the back pocket of her soil-stained indigo jeans, and counts out 7 20s and a 10. I'll take the whole shelf. The niece barely looks up. You want help carrying them? No, ma'am. I've got it. 4 trips to the car. 4 cardboard boxes. Clara wraps each jar in newspaper from a stack by the door, working fast but careful, her slim, wiry arms steady now that the initial shock has passed. The couple doesn't ask what's in the jars. They don't care. They're clearing a dead uncle's house, and they want to be done by noon. On the last trip, lifting the final box, something shifts between 2 jars in the bottom corner. A book. Small, thick, bound in green leather with a brass clasp. She almost doesn't see it. It's wedged tight, spine down, the color blending with the shadow of the box flap. She pulls it free. The leather is soft, worn smooth at the edges. The brass clasp is tarnished but intact. She knows this book. She knows it the way you know a face you haven't seen in years but never forgot. Earl Voss kept a journal exactly like this one. She remembers it in his cardigan pocket, remembers his long fingers pulling it out at the kitchen table, the silver-white hair swept back from his forehead, the birthmark near his hairline catching lamplight as he bent to write. She flips it open. The first page, in pencil, in a hand she'd recognize anywhere. The seed doesn't care about your calendar. It cares about the soil it wakes up in. She closes it. The brass clasp clicks shut under her thumb. She loads the last box of jars into her trunk, shuts it with both hands, and sits in the driver's seat, staring at the green leather journal she found wedged between 2 jars, the brass clasp still latched. That night in her trailer kitchen, Clara unlatches the brass clasp on Earl's journal and begins reading under the single overhead bulb. The overhead throws a yellow circle across the small folding table, and beyond that circle there's nothing, just the dark windows of a rented single-wide 3 miles from the farm, the hum of a refrigerator she hasn't stocked yet, and this green leather book that smells like basement air and old wax. She opens it to the first page. The handwriting is small, slanted left, and absolutely precise. Earl Voss, her grandfather's brother, a man she never met, who died in 1989 while she was still learning to ride a bicycle. Spent 42 years doing something no one asked him to do. From 1947 to 1989, he walked the Willamette Valley collecting seeds. Not buying them from catalogs, walking to farms, talking to old men and women who still grew what their parents grew. And when those farmers switched to commercial hybrids, because the extension office told them to, because the seed company reps told them to, because the brochures promised 12% higher yield, Earl asked for what they were throwing away. His philosophy shows up on nearly every third page, written in the margins, circled, underlined, returned to across decades, like a man arguing with himself and winning every time. A seed is a library. Burn the library, and you burn the memory of what the land used to know. Clara reads it at 11 p.m. She reads it again at 2 a.m. in a different entry, dated 1963, again in 1978. The man wrote it like a prayer, like something he needed to remind himself was still true, while the whole valley converted around him, while his neighbors sprayed and hybridized and forgot. She doesn't sleep. By 4:30 in the morning, the journal is half read, and she's moved to the floor, legs crossed, the brass hand lens on its cord swinging against her cream Henley as she bends over the pages. Her gray-green eyes track the columns of data Earl kept. Variety name, farm of origin, date collected, planting notes, flavor descriptions. Cascade Amber Flint corn, collected 1952 from the Hamill farm. Blue Soldaten bean, collected 1961 from a woman named Roth, who was 91 and remembered her mother planting the same seed in 1886. These aren't just seeds. These are lineages. By dawn, she's back at the farmhouse basement with a flashlight and a legal pad. The jars fill 3 shelving units against the cool stone wall. 147 mason jars, each sealed with a thin layer of paraffin wax over the metal lid. The pencil labels are faded but legible. Variety name, collection year, and a germination date penciled on the lid in Earl's left slanting hand. She checks every single one. The last germination dates are 1989, 5 years ago. 5 years these seeds have sat in the dark without anyone testing whether they're still alive. Here's what Earl understood about keeping seeds viable, and what Clara already knows from her graduate work at Oregon State. A dry seed, stored at 55 degrees Fahrenheit in low humidity, is essentially suspended. Its metabolism drops to almost nothing. The embryo inside the seed coat waits. Properly stored seeds can remain viable for decades, some grains for centuries, but germination rates decay. Every year, the percentage drops. A seed that germinates at 95% fresh might drop to 80 after 5 years, 60 after 10, 30 after 20. The clock is running. It has been running since Earl died. She selects 12 jars, carries them in a cardboard box to her lab bench at OSU the next morning, her dark auburn ponytail swinging as she walks the corridor. The test is simple and old. Blotter paper in petri dishes, 10 seeds per dish, distilled water, a warm cabinet at 70 degrees. She labels each dish with the variety name and watches. 7 days later, she counts the shoots. 9 of 12 varieties germinate above 60%. 3 of those 9 break 80. And 1, the Cascade Amber Flint corn, Earl's pride, the variety he wrote about more than any other, germinates at 84%. After 5 years of silence in a dark basement, 84% of those embryos woke up when she gave them water. These seeds are alive, but they won't be forever. The math is brutal and clear. If she waits another 5 years, germination could drop below 50%. Below that threshold, multiplying the stock becomes impractical. The window is now. She needs to grow these out, plant them, harvest them, collect fresh seed with fresh viability clocks, before Earl's 42 years of walking and collecting collapses into a shelf of dead glass jars. So she drives back to the farm, parks at the edge of the quarter-acre behind the barn, where weeds have taken over since Earl's death. Walks it. The soil is compacted, pale, threaded with quackgrass rhizomes. But it's soil, and it's hers now, and she has a rototiller in the barn that still runs if you prime it 3 times. She's out there the next Saturday, breaking ground, when the white county truck pulls up. Dale Ruckert steps out, clipboard under his arm, polished brown loafers sinking slightly in the turned earth at the field's edge, and the expression on his broad face is the kind of patient condescension you'd give a dog trying to open a door handle. Sandy blonde hair parted neatly, pale blue eyes that don't quite look at her. They look past her, at the weedy mess, at the old tiller belching blue smoke, at everything about this scene that confirms what he already decided. "What are you planting out here?" he asks, almost amused. "Corn," Clara says. She doesn't stop the tiller. Dale tells her the field hasn't been productive in 10 years. Tells her the soil test would come back deficient in everything. Tells her he has pamphlets on modern varieties, tested, proven, bred for this climate. He holds one out, that beige clipboard tucked against his ribs like a shield. His voice is cheerful, the way a banker's voice is cheerful when denying a loan. Helpful, generous with information no one asked for. Clara takes the pamphlet, says nothing, folds it into the back pocket of her worn indigo jeans, and goes back to tilling. That quiet drove him crazy. You could see it in the slight tightening around his square jaw. He wanted a conversation. He wanted gratitude. He got topsoil turning over in neat rows and the back of a woman's olive-green canvas jacket. She plants the first 12 test rows on a foggy April morning, pressing each seed into the dark soil with her thumb, the journal propped open on an overturned bucket beside her. 63 jars still waiting on the basement shelf below the farmhouse. By late May, the test rows have emerged, 12 varieties pushing green through black soil in neat lines, each marked with a wooden stake and a pencil label in Clara's hand. She moves between them every morning before the dew burns off, the brass hand lens lifted from her chest to her eye, studying leaf margins and root crowns with the same focus a jeweler gives a stone. No herbicides, no synthetic fertilizer, nothing from a bag with a corporate logo stamped on the side. Just her, the journal, and the old man's quiet conviction that soil is a living mouth. You feed it or you starve it. The compost pile behind the barn is her pharmacy. It's been cooking since March. A mountain of horse manure from the neighbor's abandoned stable, layered with straw, kitchen scraps, and the last of the autumn leaves she raked into burlap sacks back in November. Every 3 days, she drives a fork into its flank and turns the whole mass, steam rising off the dark interior like breath from a sleeping animal. A probe thermometer sunk into the center reads 140 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill weed seeds, hot enough to destroy pathogens, not so hot it burns the nitrogen out. Earl's journal is specific about this. Page 47, underlined twice. Feed the soil a meal, not a pill. She's been repeating it to herself like a prayer for weeks now. The fish emulsion comes from a cannery in Newport. 5-gallon buckets of the stuff, thick as gravy, reeking of the ocean floor. She dilutes it in a 50-gallon drum behind the trailer and applies it with a watering can, row by row, calculating 80 pounds of nitrogen equivalent per acre based on the volume of each plot. Her hands smell like a dock at low tide for days afterward. She doesn't care. The corn responds within a week. Darker green, thicker stems, leaves broad enough to cast shade on the soil beneath. Then, in the first week of June, a beige county truck pulls up the gravel drive. Dale Ruckert steps out with his clipboard tucked under one arm, khaki shirt pressed so crisp it practically crinkles when he walks. Those polished brown loafers picking their way around puddles like they're allergic to honest ground. He's got a survey form this time, county land use assessment. He walks the fence line without asking permission, makes notes with a pen he clicks open and shut, the sound carrying across the still morning air like a metronome counting down her patience. Miss Voss. He says it the way you'd address a stray dog blocking a sidewalk. I'm noting this parcel as unimproved acreage. No commercial crop, no livestock operation, no timber harvest. You understand what that designation means for adjacent property values. Clara is kneeling in row 4, the Mandan bride corn, thinning seedlings with a pocket knife. She doesn't look up. There's a seed company out of Salem, he continues, that clipboard angled so the county seal catches the light like a badge. Looking to lease valley farmland for hybrid trials. $200 per acre per year. Guaranteed income. No risk on your end. He pauses, lets that number hang. Frankly, it's more than this place is earning you now. She stands, wipes the pocket knife on her jeans, those dark indigo knees already stained with soil. The loose wisps of auburn hair at her temples catch the breeze. She looks at him with those gray-green eyes, level and cool as creek water. The farm is not for sale. 4 words, flat as a fence post driven into stone. Ruckert clicks his pen one more time, writes something on the clipboard, and walks back to his truck without another word. The man genuinely believes he's doing her a favor. That's what makes him insufferable. He's not malicious, he's just so damn certain that his way is the only way, that anyone choosing differently must be confused, or stupid, or both. And he'll keep coming back with that clipboard and that condescending patience until she either submits or he runs out of forms to file. She's not going to submit. By midsummer, the corn rows are magnificent. 7-foot stalks, deep green, leaves like banners in the July sun. The painted mountain variety has already begun to tassel, purple and gold silk catching the light. The Abenaki flint corn beside it stands nearly as tall, its stalks thick as a man's wrist. Visitors driving past on the county road slow down to look, though nobody stops. But row 7 is wrong. The Soap Creek winter rye sits in the lowest corner of the test field, a depression where the old drainage tile collapsed years ago, a fact Clara didn't discover until it was too late. The plants are yellowing from the base up, stunted at barely 12 inches, while the other rows tower overhead. She tells herself it's just slow, a late developer. The journal mentions that this variety takes its time. Then the rains come. A full week of heavy July storms, the kind that turn Oregon clay into soup. Water pools in that low corner, 3 inches, 4. The rye drowns in silence while she watches from the trailer porch, powerless to stop it. When the sun finally returns, she walks out to assess the damage. 90% of the Soap Creek stand is flat, stems brown and limp against the mud. She pulls one plant, and there it is, a white fungal mat coating the roots like cotton batting. Fusarium, root rot. The kind of death that starts underground, where you can't see it coming until the whole plant is already gone. That night, rain still tapping the trailer roof, she sits at the kitchen table with a single mason jar in front of her. Maybe 200 kernels of Soap Creek winter rye, all that's left from Earl's original collection. The jar is small enough to close her hand around. 60 years of genetic memory reduced to this. She thinks about Ruckert's offer. $200 an acre. Easy money, no risk. She could take the lease, let the hybrid company handle the headaches, spend her evenings doing something other than mourning a dead row of grain. Then she pulls the green leather-bound journal from the shelf and opens it to a page near the back. Earl's handwriting, spidery but precise, the brass clasp still warm from her palm. A seed is a library. Burn the library, and you burn the memory of what the land used to know. Her jaw sets. She turns to a fresh page in her own notebook and begins sketching. A raised bed, 12 inches of elevation, gravel beneath for drainage. Channels cut on either side to pull water away from the roots. She kneels in the mud at dusk, pulls one stunted rye plant from the waterlogged row, and sees a white fungal mat coating the roots. Row 7 is dead, and she has only enough Soap Creek winter rye seed for one more attempt. She builds the raised beds in August, 12 inches of elevation, gravel drainage beneath, hand-mixed compost on top, and plants the last 200 rye kernels in September for a winter cover crop trial. But let me tell you how she gets there. Because between that dead row 7 and the moment those last seeds hit soil, Clara Voss does something most people never manage. She doesn't panic. She doesn't mourn. She diagnoses. That white fungal mat on the roots, Pythium, a water mold. It thrives in saturated soil, in oxygen-starved conditions, in exactly the kind of flat clay plot she'd used for row 7. Earl's journal had warned her, in his slanted handwriting, 3 pages past where she'd stopped reading. Rye wants cold feet and a dry collar. Cold feet. It tolerates frost just fine. A dry collar. The crown of the plant, where stem meets root, cannot sit in standing water. She'd planted flat. She'd planted wrong. So she rebuilds. August heat pressing down on the Willamette Valley, loose wisps of dark auburn hair plastered to her temples with sweat. The brass hand lens swinging against her chest with every shovel stroke. She measures the slope first, pulls a 4-foot level and the length of string across the bed frame, calculates a 2% grade end to end. That's roughly a 1/4-inch drop per foot, enough to move water sideways without washing soil. She hauls river gravel from the creek bed on the north edge of the property, wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow, and lines each bed 4 inches deep. Then the fill, a 60-40 mix of her own compost to native soil. She measures by volume using a 5-gallon bucket. 3 buckets compost, 2 buckets of that pale Willamette clay loam she's been amending all summer. She mixes by hand with a garden fork until the color evens out to a uniform dark coffee brown. 12 beds, each one 4 feet wide, 16 feet long, 12 inches above grade. It takes her 11 days working alone. September 3rd, she plants 200 kernels of Soap Creek winter rye. Every last seed she has of a variety the world forgot existed. She spaces them 3 inches apart in rows 6 inches wide, presses each one a ½ inch deep with her thumb, covers them, waters once, lightly, from a watering can. Then she waits. October arrives cold and wet. The rye germinates. She counts on her knees with a pencil behind her ear and the green leather-bound journal open beside her on the gravel path. 174 emerged seedlings from 200 planted. That's an 87% emergence rate. Strong. By November, the plants stand 4 inches tall, dark green blades fanning outward, tillering at the base exactly the way a healthy winter rye should. 2-3 tillers per plant already. The drainage works. No standing water. No pythium. The crowns stay dry even after 3 straight days of rain. Meanwhile, the summer harvest comes in. And here's where the scope of what Clara's built becomes clear. From that original 200-gram jar of Cascade amber flint corn, the kernels her grandfather Earl stored in a mason jar with silica gel packets sometime in the late 1970s, she pulls 11 pounds of clean, dry seed. 11 pounds from less than ½ a pound. That's a multiplication rate the commercial guys would kill for. 3 pounds of Polk County blue pod bean, fat and purple-black in their pods. 6 other varieties yield between 1 and 4 pounds each. A pale yellow cherry tomato, a crookneck squash with a neck as long as her forearm, a parsnip so aromatic it smells like black pepper when she cuts the root. She begins proper documentation. Not just Earl's shorthand anymore. Full records. She photographs each variety at maturity with a second-hand Polaroid camera, tapes the photos into a composition notebook, and writes beneath each one, days to maturity, plant height in inches, yield per row foot in ounces, disease resistance observations. Meticulous. She cross-references Earl's journal entries with USDA historical records she pulls from the Oregon State Library on microfiche. The confirmation lands like a thunderclap she keeps to herself. 23 of his varieties have no living accession in any public seed bank. They exist nowhere else on Earth, except in her raised beds and in her labeled mason jars on the basement shelf. 23 extinct genomes, alive, growing, in the hands of a 24-year-old woman the county extension office treats like a hobby gardener. Speaking of which, Dale Ruckert shows up a 3rd time, mid-November. That beige plastic clipboard tucked under his arm, chin lifted, polished brown loafers somehow spotless despite walking her gravel driveway. But this time he's brought a friend, a man in a fleece vest with a Pacific Northwest Seeds logo embroidered on the chest. Regional commercial outfit. They want to evaluate her varieties for potential licensing opportunities. The fleece vest guy does most of the talking. Vague language, big smiles, phrases like mutually beneficial and preliminary assessment and we'd handle all the paperwork. Clara stands at her gate, olive green field jacket buttoned to the collar against the November chill. Gray-green eyes level. She listens to the entire pitch without interrupting. Then she says 5 words. "I'll need a receipt." They blink. The fleece vest guy looks at Dale. Dale's pale blue eyes narrow. He almost says something. You can see the muscle in his square jaw flex. But he doesn't. They came with no written terms, no contract, no formal offer. Just a verbal handshake and the assumption that a young woman farming alone would be grateful for any attention at all. They leave without one. Dale's loafers crunch down the gravel. He doesn't look back. A closed door sounds like nothing. That's what makes it so loud. Then something small shifts. Walt Hobson, mid-50s, runs beef cattle on 200 acres a quarter-mile south, stops his truck by Clara's fence line one Tuesday afternoon. Engine idling. He watches her work the compost pile for a full 10 minutes without speaking. She doesn't acknowledge him. He drives off. The following week, she finds a 5-gallon bucket of well-rotted horse manure by her front gate. No note, no name. She knows whose horses those are. On a cold February morning, she walks the rows and counts. 174 rye plants standing upright, green against frost-white soil. Each one a copy of a genome the world thought was gone. And she whispers Earl's words to herself as she kneels to check the crown tiller count. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Not a poker hand, not a stock tip. Something deeper. Something where the cost of being wrong isn't money, but meaning. Where if you fail, it proves every smirking neighbor right. Confirms every clipboard-carrying bureaucrat's assessment that you're just a girl playing in dirt that doesn't belong to her. Clara Voss did. She wagered 2 years of her life, her grandfather's reputation, and every cent she didn't have on seeds the world had declared dead. And by the second spring, the evidence was growing in plain sight. April comes to Harlan County, Kentucky, the way it always does. Hesitant, muddy, suspicious of its own warmth. But the acre behind Earl Voss's farmhouse isn't hesitant at all. It's rioting. 23 plots, each one flagged with a hand-lettered wooden stake. Each one holding a variety of grain or legume or brassica that no university catalog lists as extant. Clara moves through the rows at dawn, her dark auburn ponytail catching early light, the brass hand lens bouncing gently against her sternum as she bends to inspect a stand of bloody butcher corn that hasn't been commercially grown since Eisenhower was president. The soil beneath her boots, those scuffed brown leather boots with brass eyelets she's worn through 2 winters now, is darker than anything on neighboring land. Not by accident, by design. 18 months ago, when she first tested this ground, the organic matter reading came back at 0.5%. 0.5%. That's construction fill. That's dead earth wearing a costume. Now it sits at 1.4%, nearly tripled, because she followed Earl's composting protocols to the letter. Sheet mulching with oak leaves and creek bank clay. Worm castings from the bin behind the barn. Fish meal worked in at 6 inches every October. The Journal said it would take 2 years to see real structure. The Journal was conservative. She's seeing it in 18 months. And the proof isn't just in a lab number. It's in the way a handful of that soil crumbles between her fingers like coffee grounds instead of calcium powder. dark and alive, and smelling of rain that hasn't fallen yet. She works the full acre with hand tools, no tractor. A wheel hoe, a broad fork, a set of dibbers Earl carved from hickory sometime in the 1980s. Her olive-green field jacket hangs on a fence post by 7 a.m. because the work makes her sweat even in April. Every variety gets its own isolation distance. Every ear of corn gets bagged before the tassels shed. This isn't gardening. This is genetic preservation performed with the precision of a laboratory and the budget of a yard sale. In late April, she packs 14 small paper envelopes, each one labeled in her tight, neat handwriting with variety name, collection date, GPS coordinates, and germination percentage, into a padded mailer. She includes a 6-page letter addressed to Dr. Helen Marsh at the USDA National Center for Genetic Resources Preservation in Fort Collins, Colorado. Fort Collins, the cold vault. 600,000 seed accessions stored at -18 degrees Celsius in a building most Americans don't know exists. Clara's letter explains Earl's collection, his 40 years of isolation protocols, his hand pollination records. She includes her own grow-out data, germination rates, days to maturity, phenotype observations cross-referenced against Earl's journal entries from the 1970s. She tapes the mailer shut at her kitchen table, drives it to the post office in Everts, and pays $4.60 for priority shipping. Then she waits. 6 weeks of silence from Fort Collins. 6 weeks of nothing but the work. And the work in May and June is corn. Specifically, it's the maddening, exacting ritual of hand pollination to maintain genetic purity in open-pollinated varieties. Earl did this every summer for 40 years. The journal explains why in his careful, slanted script. Cross-pollination is the death of a landrace. One stray tassel from a neighbor's hybrid and 50 years of selection are noise. So Clara bags the tassels before they shed. Small glassine envelopes secured with paper clips, one per plant. She watches the silks emerge on the ears below, timing it precisely. When the silks are receptive, moist, pale green, catching pollen like tiny antennae, she removes the tassel bags, taps the pollen into a dish, and applies it to the silks with a fine bristled brush. Plant by plant, row by row, hundreds of times across 3 weeks. It's work that would drive most people insane. Clara does it at 5 in the morning and again at dusk, when the air is still and pollen doesn't drift. Her gray-green eyes focused close, the brass hand lens lifted to check silk viability. Her freckled face calm and unhurried. She talks to no one. Dale Ruckert hasn't been by since November. The county extension agent apparently found better things to do than lecture a woman who won't listen. Good. Let him polish his loafers somewhere else. The letter from Fort Collins arrives on a Tuesday in late June. Plain manila envelope. Return address printed in standard government font. Clara pulls it from her mailbox at the end of the gravel drive, and she knows what it is before she opens it, because Fort Collins doesn't write back to cranks. They get 1,000 submissions a year from people who think they've found something special in Grandma's garden. Most get a form rejection. This is hand-signed. Dr. Helen Marsh's letter is 2 pages, single-spaced. The language is measured, academic, precise. And underneath it, Clara can feel a kind of controlled astonishment. Fort Collins ran SSR marker analysis on all 23 submissions. They compared the genetic fingerprints against historical herbarium specimens and their own database of varieties last catalogued in the 1940s and 1950s. Viability testing at controlled temperature and humidity confirmed the samples are robust. The results: 19 of Clara's 23 submitted varieties are genetically identical matches to accessions the USDA declared lost. Gone, extinct in cultivation, written off the ledger decades ago. 4 more, 4, are previously undocumented land races, varieties that were never in any institutional collection. Varieties Earl Voss maintained alone, in silence, on a hillside farm in Kentucky for longer than most careers last. Fort Collins wants all of them. The letter from the USDA National Center for Genetic Resources Preservation arrives in a plain manila envelope. She reads it standing at her mailbox, and for the first time in 2 years, her hands are shaking for a reason that isn't exhaustion. The phone calls start the following week. First Fort Collins, then Cornell, then the Svalbard Global Seed Vault liaison in Norway, all asking the same question: how much seed can she supply, and how soon? Clara stands at the kitchen counter with the green leather-bound journal open beside the phone, Earl's handwriting cramped and deliberate across the page, and she does the math out loud to no one. The USDA wants full accessions, minimum 2,500 seeds per variety for long-term cold storage at -18 degrees Celsius. She's got 19 confirmed varieties, 19 lines that haven't existed in any catalog, any bank, any institutional freezer for decades. Some of them she's only multiplied to 800 seeds. Others are closer to 4,000. She pencils the numbers into the margin of Earl's journal, right below his own yield estimates from 1979. And the answer is plain: 2 more growing seasons. 2 more cycles of pollination bags and isolation distances and hand threshing on the barn floor before she can deliver what Fort Collins needs without gutting her own working stock. She tells them 2 years. They say they'll wait. Now here's where it gets loud. A reporter from the Corvallis Gazette-Times drives out in early August. Young guy, earnest, notepad instead of a recorder. He walks the acre with her. He photographs the Willamette flint corn, standing 8 feet tall, in rows so clean they look ruled. He photographs the brass hand lens hanging against her cream Henley as she bends to check tasseling progress. The article runs the following Thursday, front page of the local section. Estate sale jars contain seeds thought extinct for decades. They quote university geneticists. They quote the USDA liaison. They quote Clara exactly once. They were his life's work. I'm just finishing what he started. 5 words about herself. 14 about Earl. That ratio tells you everything. The article ripples outward, the way these things do. First, the agricultural press picks it up, then a couple of food magazines, then the commercial seed industry notices that someone is sitting on 19 varieties of open-pollinated genetics with no intellectual property encumbrance. And that's when Pacific Northwest Seeds comes back. You remember these people. Same company that offered her pennies on the dollar 2 years ago. Same outfit that looked at those jars like they were roadside junk. This time they send a different representative. Sharper suit, thicker contract. $15,000 per variety for exclusive propagation rights. 19 varieties, That's $285,000 on the table, slid across Clara's kitchen table in a manila folder with a corporate letterhead so glossy it catches the overhead light. She reads every page. The brass hand lens rests against her chest, catching that same light. Her gray-green eyes move line by line. And what she finds in the fine print is exactly what Earl warned about in a journal entry dated March 1983, the one where he wrote in capital letters, underlined twice, "The seed must stay free or it dies in a vault no farmer can open." The contract's terms would transfer ownership of the genetic material to Pacific Northwest Seeds, exclusive propagation rights, no farmer seed saving, no public deposit without corporate approval. $285,000 to make 19 living lineages into proprietary products locked behind licensing fees. Clara slides the folder back across the table. "Those are my terms," she says. And her terms are these: open access deposit in the public seed bank, no exclusive licenses, farmer seed saving rights preserved in perpetuity, every variety available to any grower who wants it forever. The representative, mid-30s, polished shoes, the kind of guy who genuinely believes he's offering salvation, leans forward and explains, patiently, like she's confused, that without commercial backing, these varieties will never reach farmers at scale. Distribution networks, marketing budgets, retail partnerships. He says the word infrastructure 3 times in 90 seconds. Clara points through the kitchen window at her acre of thriving plants. Willamette flint tasseling in the August heat, blue-podded shelling peas climbing their trellises, a tomato variety with no name except the one Earl gave it, Nora Red, after Clara's grandmother, hanging heavy on the vine, splitting ripe and perfect. She says nothing else. The silence fills the kitchen like summer humidity. He leaves. His rental car kicks gravel all the way down the drive. Now here's the part that matters more than any contract or phone call from Norway. The community shift, the one that's been building so quietly you'd miss it if you blinked. Walt, the neighbor to the east, the same man who watched Clara haul fish guts across her land and said nothing kind about it for 2 years. Walt shows up on a Saturday morning. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't mention the years of sideways looks. He asks Clara to teach him her composting method, specifically the fish emulsion recipe, specifically the ratio of bone meal to kelp extract that turned her soil organic matter from 0.5% to 1.5% in 26 months. She teaches him, standing right there in the barn, brass hand lens catching the light from the open door, showing him how to crumble the dark soil between his fingers, soil that used to be pale as ash. 2 other valley farmers stop by that same week. They bring questions and empty notebooks. One of them is a woman Clara's age who runs 40 acres of hay and wants to know how she got 2.2 bales per acre against the county average of 1.8. Nobody apologizes. They just show up. They listen. They write things down. And that's how it spreads, not through arguments won, but through evidence too heavy to ignore. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Have you ever been so alone in your conviction that even the proof growing under your hands felt like it might be a hallucination? That's where Clara lived for 2 years, and now the proof is walking itself into other people's fields, carried by the same neighbors who once drove past without waving. Dale Ruckert pulls into her driveway on a Tuesday afternoon, clipboard absent for the first time, and stands by his truck for a full minute before walking toward her. She's kneeling in the corn rows and doesn't look up. 3 years later, Clara Voss stands in a climate-controlled vault in Fort Collins, Colorado, watching a technician seal her seeds, Earl's seeds, into foil laminate packets for storage at -18 degrees Celsius, alongside 600,000 other accessions from around the world. 19 varieties, 19 packets, each one labeled with a Voss collection accession number printed in small black type on waterproof stock. The technician handles them the way you'd handle museum glass. Gloved fingers, measured movements, each packet lowered into a steel drawer that slides shut with a whispered click. Clara watches through the observation window, the brass hand lens resting against the cream Henley beneath her field jacket, catching fluorescent light in this sterile room that smells of nothing at all. The 4 undocumented landraces, the ones no database had ever recorded, the ones that existed only in Earl's handwritten notes and in the soil of 38 acres in the Willamette Valley, received new official designations that afternoon. One of them, that early maturing flint corn with the deep amber kernels and the cold tolerance that shouldn't exist in a Dent Flint cross, is entered into the national collection as Voss Valley Flint, named for a man with silver-white hair swept back from his forehead, a thumbprint birthmark near the hairline, and a green leather journal with a brass clasp. A man who spent 43 years collecting what the world was throwing away. Duplicate samples shipped to Svalbard 3 weeks later. Norway, the global seed vault, carved into permafrost inside a mountain on an Arctic archipelago. The ultimate backup for human agriculture, designed to survive wars, floods, grid collapse, everything short of the planet cracking open. And sitting inside it now, sealed in foil laminate, beside contributions from every major gene bank on Earth, are seeds that Clara Voss bought for $150 at an estate sale in 1987. Let that land for a second. $150. A dusty chest that Dale Ruckert wouldn't have glanced at twice. Seeds he would have swept into a county dumpster if he'd had the authority. And now they're in the most secure seed storage facility humans have ever built. Back in Oregon, the farm changes shape slowly, the way a river changes a valley. Not overnight, over seasons. Clara's 38 acres become an informal teaching site. She runs workshops, seasonal, open to anyone, no fees, no certifications, no glossy binders with county seals on the back. Small-scale farmers drive in from 3 counties to learn seed saving, compost thermodynamics, the mechanics of maintaining genetic diversity in a field smaller than a parking lot. She teaches with her hands, a stave of oak holding a temperature probe in a compost windrow, a strip of muslin held over a tassel to demonstrate controlled pollination. Dark soil crumbled between fingers that used to be pale as ash. The county extension office lists her workshops in their quarterly bulletin. No commentary, no endorsement. Just a date, a location, and the words, "Open to all growers." Dale Ruckert's name isn't on the bulletin anymore. He transferred to a desk position in Salem 2 years prior. Took his clipboard with him, took his polished loafers and his pressed tan chinos, and his patient, smiling certainty that Clara Voss was a sentimental fool playing farmer on dead land. Nobody mentions him much. That's the thing about being made irrelevant. It's quieter than being defeated. You just stop mattering. The conversations move on without you, and one day you realize no one's asked your opinion in months. Clara never sells exclusive rights to anything. Not to the university, not to the seed companies that start circling in the early 90s when drought-tolerant genetics become fashionable again. She earns a modest income, $40,000 to $60,000 a year, from seed multiplication contracts with public institutions, growing out accessions for university breeding programs, planting, isolating, harvesting, cleaning, packaging, shipping. Quiet work, repetitive work, the kind of work that keeps a farm alive without selling its soul. The 38 acres sustain themselves. The organic matter sits at 1.8% and climbing. The farm is no longer for sale. It was never going to be. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Not money, time. 20 years of your one life, poured into soil and silence and a dead man's green journal. Decades pass. Clara at 45, silver threading through auburn hair that still pulls back in a low ponytail, wisps still escaping at the temples. The freckles across the bridge of her nose have deepened with sun. The birthmark below her left ear has faded to nearly nothing. The brass hand lens still hangs on its leather cord, worn smooth now at the edges from 20 years of handling. A young woman works beside her in the field, 22 years old, from the State University's plant science program. She showed up in March with a notebook and a question about landrace adaptation, and she hasn't left. She kneels in the rows the way Clara once knelt, forward-leaning, hands reaching toward the plants, purposeful and quiet. Clara pulls the green leather journal from inside her field jacket. The brass clasp is tarnished now, dark with the oil of decades of fingers, Earl's fingers, then hers. She holds it out. The apprentice takes it with both hands, like museum glass. The corn rows stretch behind them, green and tall, cascade amber flint tasseling in the morning light, the same variety Earl first collected in 1951. Still alive, still growing, still remembering what the land used to know before the world decided to forget. She kneels in the spring soil of Earl's farm, opens the brass clasp of the green journal, and reads the first line aloud to a young woman standing beside her with a notebook. A seed is a library. Burn the library, and you burn the memory of what the land used to know. The apprentice writes it down. The corn rows stretch behind them, green and tall, and the soil beneath their knees is dark as coffee. 2.1% organic matter now, and climbing.